Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, where Craig Touch, the founder of Hidden Gems, and myself, Roland Hume, chat to special guests about this crazy industry we're in of self-publishing and being a self-published author. And today we have a very special guest who is very familiar to both Craig and myself, Nate. And Nate goes way back in the Hidden Gems legacy, and he's a cover designer, an expert in so many different things. He's like the Swiss Army knife of people to know. And we're here today to discuss covers specifically and how covers can have a massive impact on your book's success. So how are you doing today, Nate?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. It's been a kind of a busy morning, but I've got coffee here, so I'm good to go.
Coffee. I'm a coffee achiever. Caffeine achiever, that's what they call it. No coffee, no working.
Well, it's really like coffee flavored sugar milk, so it's just kind of like it's my breakfast of champions.
And speaking of sweet and bitter at the same time, we have the man Craig Touch himself, a writer himself, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems. How's that for an intro, Craig?
Yeah, sure. I guess you have to keep changing things up, right? Sweet and bitter. Yeah. I guess it depends on who I'm talking to. But this is something we wanted to cover more in general for a while because we've done a bunch of different blogs on the topic. I think even Nate wrote one or two of them. And of course, Roland's written a couple of them, and both of you do cover design for people. And, recently we spoke to Joanne McLean when she talked about how changing her cover, among other things, but the cover being one of the major things, it ended up doubling her book sales. And I know a lot of people sort of still don't understand the importance of cover. We're always taught, don't judge a book by its cover, but people do, right? And it's not even necessarily a judgment thing. I mean, that is part of it for sure. But on Amazon or most book sites, really, people, that's the first thing people see. They see your cover. And when they're looking at a ribbon of books to buy or a list of bestsellers or whatever, the first thing they see is your cover. And if your cover is not on point, you're not going to get them to click and see your great blurb or be able to click the look inside or purchase the book. So, covers are pretty much the most important thing to get right, other than, writing a good book. So anyway, we wanted to talk about that, and you guys are sort of like the resident experts here. So, I don't know. What do you guys think? Like, what goes into like a good cover? What's the main sort of thing?
Okay. So what your book cover has to deliver, like your book cover is making a promise to anyone who's looking at your book. And that promise is, this is the kind of book that you will get. Like that's the basic gist. So that means that your cover needs to communicate what genre your book is. It needs to communicate like the tone of your book, if it's gritty or funny or that kind of thing. Like these are things like you need to be able to communicate like at a glance. I think that's probably like the biggest thing for a book cover. Like you have to be able to communicate your entire book, like in, at a glance, and which is why it's like so important to have someone who knows what they're doing, not just like a designer. Like I see people, my nephew does graphic design, or like I've got this friend who, like an amazing designer. Like that's not enough. Like you have to have someone who is familiar with the like market of the book you're trying to write, because having a competent design will get you 3/4 of the way there, but it's like that last quarter where your competition will absolutely stomp on you, like in the rankings, if you don't have all of the things that like genre readers are going to be expecting in like book covers. It's the most important thing in a book cover is you're making a promise to your readers, and then you have to make sure you keep it with like the that you're writing. So that's the gist.
I totally agree. I love the idea of an unspoken promise because it is exactly that. I mean, I wrote a blog post a few months ago where I went to the top 100 of thrillers and the top 100 romance, and I broke it down by the numbers. And you can see that your book cover has to fit a dress code. It's like if somebody's looking for a thriller, they want the cover to look like a thriller. And if you get that right, it's basically an unspoken promise to the reader. Hey, I get your genre. That's why I have designed my cover like this. And it really does break down to the numbers. Like in thrillers, 82% of the top 100 in when I went and checked, you know, they had sans serif text as opposed to serif text. They had 58% had white text. The dominant colors were normally white and yellow and red, and these different things, they're all broken down in the numbers, and you can see the vast majority of successful books tick all of these boxes because that's what readers expect to see. It's like a dress code. If your cover doesn't meet these expectations, people are going to be like, well, it doesn't look like what I'm used to reading, or doesn't look like what I'm used to in this genre, so I'm going to skip it. And your cover is where it all begins, whether it's an advert on Facebook or whether it's an advert on Amazon, or whether you're sending it out through a newsletter. The cover is the first thing people see, and that's the first hurdle you have to get them over to click, to have an interest. And yeah, it's all about like meeting that reader promise.
I mean, and you could have like the best book in the world, and so many people, you know, they write amazing books and they just have no idea like how to like market them. And it's like no one's ever going to see them like if you don't have at least like some fundamental understanding of how to package like the product that you've made, you know. So if you don't have like those skills, I mean, I've seen people who were just like, oh yeah, I'm going to use Canva, or I'm going to go, you know, download some free stock and cobble something together. And they come back and it's like, oh, I don't understand why my book's not selling. You know, no one's noticed it or whatever. And I've written an amazing book, and like that's why. Like it's that people are just literally passing over your book, not even giving it a second thought, because it like there's so much competition, so many professionally designed covers who attached to equally good books, that people just don't have the attention span to spend to click on a cover that's not like immediately grabbing their attention, to read the blurb, to find out about like what your book's about. So it's just it's so crucial. It's the like 100% the most crucial thing, like you guys said, like the book cover. Like even if like you can't write a blurb, you've got to nail the book cover 100%. Like it has to be done, or you,
because people won't even read the blurb unless they like the book cover.
Yeah. Exactly. And I mean, you've invested so much time and energy in a book. I mean, this is like months or even years of your life, and you package it in a way that no one is ever going to see it. Then, I mean, if your goal is, I wrote a book and that's the one thing I wanted to do with my life, and it's published, that's great. Like that's 100% awesome if that's what your goal is. But if your goal is, I want to make a living, I want to pay my mortgage, I want to feed my family, then you have to get good at the marketing aspect, or you have to outsource to someone who is good at the marketing aspect. Like you don't have a choice one way or the other. You have to make like one of those two calls.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of authors starting out, they don't appreciate just how significant this is, because it's to me, it's like even advertising. It's like you can have the best advertising background in the world, but if you are advertising something that doesn't grab people's attention, it doesn't matter. You can spend all the money in the world, it's not going to sell a book that people don't want to buy. Whereas if you get the cover right, it makes all of the difference. It's all about that conversion rate, and every single step of the process is like, you know, they see your cover and they click on it, and then they read your blurb and they like it, and then they read your look inside and they like it. And it's like every one of these things is a hurdle to get over, and you have to get all of them right. And if you do, then the percentage of people who you can get to your product page who end up becoming readers ends up making you a profit. But if you get any of those steps wrong, you're going to lose people along the way.
Exactly. Right. Yep.
And cover is that first step, right? You have to get that right. So, and this is something that I've seen a lot. And actually even today, I was talking over email with somebody who had a thriller and they weren't getting a lot of clicks, and they were asking me if I had any ideas. And, I looked at the cover, and the cover to me looked like a YA children's book cover. It was illustrated. It had a kid on the thing, and he was, doing something. And it's like, this doesn't say thriller in any sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're not selling it to the right group of people. Like maybe it is in the thriller categories on Amazon, but anybody looking at it in any medium that's going to show them the cover and they have to click to read more are just going to discount it right away because of that, like you said, that unspoken promise of here's a book with a cover that meets the expectations, so that I've written a book that you want to read because my cover is the same as, or it gives you the feeling that this is a thriller, not a book that gives you a feeling that this is a young adult title or whatever. So that's absolutely the truth there, is that you've made this promise to the reader. And a lot of authors say to me that I wanted to do something different because I want to be unique and I want to stand out. And this isn't the time to stand out. If you're a self-published author, especially if you're just getting started, that's not the place to stand out. You want to stand out, write a really unique book that is great. But when you are trying to put your book up against everyone else, and these days, there's so many books out there, you need every advantage you can. And that means, for a cover, that means something that meets the expectations of the readers. That means not different, not unique. I mean, it's going to be different. It's not a copy of someone else's, but like Roland was saying, there's certain things that people see, the type of font, the type of color scheme, a lot of thrillers have sort of like somebody on the cover, like a man or a silhouette, or somebody running or whatever. Like there's a lot of these common themes, and every genre is different. So you need a cover designer, if you can't do it yourself, that understands the genre, or at the very least understands how to research a genre that they haven't worked with to understand what is gonna sell in that genre and what is the appropriate cover for that. Because as you said, people hire these great graphic designers, these great illustrators or whatever, who have no idea. They've never done a book cover. And so they do these like beautiful looking covers, but they're just not what people are looking for in that genre. And so they don't sell. And then they wonder why, like, oh my God, everybody said this was a beautiful picture. Sure. Yeah. Hang it up in a museum, but it's not, it's not a good book cover. So, that's.
Yeah. And I mean, just to break off on that point, I mean, eventually you do get to the point where it doesn't matter what's on your cover. You're selling your author name, because I mean, when you get to the point where people know who you are, you can be more experimental. You can take risks. You can do something that is outside like genre convention, because people aren't looking at your covers anymore. They see this book is written by, whoever their favorite author is, and they buy it immediately. The cover is almost incidental. And I mean, a lot of like big name authors have multiple covers for their books now. I mean, in the self-published space, I see all the time, in romance especially, where the ebook and the print cover will be different, because like they have that option of selling, like a print cover on their website, or they'll have sort of modesty covers where like the front cover won't be like the man chest. It'll just be this plain cover with just the title and just a solid block of color, like, because that's easier to read at the beach, so no one like looks at you funny, like when you've got this book cracked open or whatever. So I mean, like at that point, like the book cover is incidental. But until you get to that point, until you are at a stage where you can put out a book and make 5 figures or make 6 figures, you have to like follow what everyone else is doing. And if you try to do something like clever or cute, or I'm taking my romance book, and because I saw 50 Shades, like they just have a necktie on the book and that was it, I'm going to do that too, it'll be like to your detriment, and your book will not sell.
I think there's a distinction as well between what works for traditionally published books and what works for self-published books, because traditionally published books have the ability to get thousands of copies of your book into brick and mortar stores, and they have all of the mailing lists and stuff. And if you're a big author, like the new James Bond book by Anthony Horowitz, it's like, it's a James Bond book, it's Anthony Horowitz, you could literally just have a blank cover and people would still buy it. Whereas when you're a self-published author, you have to sell yourself through your cover before people will even take a chance on you.
So true.
Yeah, and I mean that's a great point, because I have had lots of authors do that too, and they give me that apples to oranges comparison. Well, I'll say, well, your cover, you've got a romance cover, but you don't have people on it. And people, most readers, romance is about relationships between people. And so often it's people on the cover that will sell the book. And then of course there's the levels of, men sell, I find that attract people more because the readers are primarily women. Couples do, say second best, female only does third best, no person at all does worst. But then people will say to me, they'll have a cover that has no people on it, and I'll say, well, that's part of your issue. And then they'll point to, their favorite big name author that sells billions of books who has a cover that's similar with no people, and they'll say, well, that person sold 7 billion books and they have no cover. And I'm like, yeah, but they have, they have no people on it. And I mean, those people don't need to follow conventions anymore. They have a list of people, whether it's their own mailing list or just people out there who are waiting for their book to drop. They're gonna buy it no matter what. It doesn't matter. They have an alert set up. Oh, this person has a new book, I'm going to buy it. And that's it. It doesn't matter. They're not even looking at the cover. You can't do that if you don't have a big list, if you don't have a whole bunch of people ready to buy your book that are going to push you up the charts regardless of what you look like or what your cover looks like, right? So yeah, exactly. It's hard some people just don't get that there is a difference between, having made it and being able to do your own thing and trying to make it and having to conform a bit.
And it's important to stand out. I mean, it's like you were saying, you don't want to ape someone else's specific style, but at the same time, there are 5 or 6 things you can tick, if you look at any bestseller list for romance or thriller or mystery or horror, there are 5 or 6 things that almost all of those book covers have in common. And the thing you need to do is you grab all of those and then you put them together in a way that that stands out in some way that makes it uniquely your own. Because I mean, even though you're limited, in the number in the amount of design elements that these things have in common, you can really make things your own to an extent, creatively, as long as you make sure that you have all of them there, you check all the boxes, then you're good to go. You've sold the premise, you have your mood, your tone, your genre. As long as all of that's communicated, that's all you really need. And then after that, if you've made sure that you check all those boxes, then you can play around some. Then you can take make things your own, or use things that not everyone else is doing. But it's really super important that if you're just starting out, absolutely 100%, you have to hit them all. Or your book, I mean, it's like having your arm tied behind your back. I mean, it's your selling process is going to be so much harder. Your advertising is going to be so much harder. You have an ad, for Amazon or for Facebook or whatever. And if you have a substandard cover, you might as well be flushing your money down the toilet. I mean, it's not going to sell your book. So everything starts there. And when I write a book, before I start, I might have a basic premise of a book I want to write. The very, very first thing I do 100% of the time is I make the cover first, always. I always design the book cover for the book first, because as a visual designer, before I ever started writing, that's where I came from, is graphic design, visual design. When I started writing, I would make a book cover and that would tell me what kind of book I was writing, what the tone was supposed to be, what genre it was supposed to be. Like, and then I could craft a story like around that cover that would 100% sell the story because I started with the cover first. Now, most authors do it the reverse. I mean, they write the book and it's like, oh, okay, now it's time to design the cover. But like, it's always a good idea if you're a first-time author, or even if you've written 100 books, make notes about like the important things if you're going to design your own cover, or even if you're outsourcing, because your cover designer, if they're worth their salt, is going to be asking you what is important to have on this book cover. And you have to be able to tell them, I've written a thriller, that's a medical thriller. So like, we need to have sans serif font. We need to have, a specific color scheme. We need to have like, some sort of like medical sort of like imagery, like on the cover, like to, lab equipment, or, like a hospital, or, like something to show the reader at a just a glance that like, this is what I've written. And then hopefully they click the cover because it's, it's something that they want to read. And then they read your premise, or your blurb rather, and they see that like, oh yeah, this sounds cool. Then they click your book, or if you're advertising, or if you have an ad and they see that it's something that like, it's a book that's been sponsored, or a book that pops up on like a famous author that they like to read, and your book looks similar to like the book that like they just clicked on, you're way more likely to get a conversion from that, versus like if you have like this smiling happy face, like you were saying, like on a thriller book, like no one's going to click that, like it doesn't make any sense. Like you're just going to confuse people.
Yeah, I always say it's almost like James Bond going to the ambassador's reception. If you go to the ambassador's reception, everyone is wearing a tuxedo. You can't even get in if you're not wearing a tuxedo. But James Bond, of course, wears the sharpest tuxedo and has the brightest flower, and it's the sleekest and the best fitting. So he stands out, but at the same time, you have to blend in.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
very, very super important.
Yeah, and I mean that brings up another point that I've heard before, is that, and as you said, a good cover designer is going to ask for the author for their feedback, get a feel for the book. They usually haven't read it. They don't know the intricacies and the plots and the thises and that. So it's absolutely a good idea for them to talk to the author and get a feel for it. But at the same time, if the author is trying to micromanage the process and say to the cover designer, no, I want this and I want that, and the cover designer's like, well, this is the kind of thing that sells in your genre, and like, yeah, but I want this and I want that. It's like, you're sort of undercutting the whole point of hiring a professional that understands everything, right? Because I hear that happening too, where people, they said like, oh, somebody said I should hire somebody to do a cover, so I did, and my book still doesn't sell. And then you look at it and like, yeah, but it doesn't really fit the genre. It's like, well, the designer wanted to do all these things, but I didn't like that, and so I changed. It's like, well, and what's the point, right? You might as well just sell yourself.
No. Yeah.
Those are always the ones. Oh, go ahead, Nate.
Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, those are always the ones where your heart breaks a little, where they're like, well, it's kind of a cross-genre thing. And it's like, that I appreciate what you're doing with your book, but that's not necessarily how self-published books sell.
Yeah. It's when you get hired as a designer, and I have years and years of experience with this. And a lot of times you get someone who hires you to be their hands. And it can be a very frustrating experience, because when you get somebody who hires you to be their hands, as opposed to someone who hires you to produce something for them and based on your expertise, and you just want somebody who wants to micromanage, it almost always ends up being like a subpar product. Like it almost always ends up being not just like a frustrating experience on the part of the designer, but a waste of money on the part of like the author too, because they are going to pay the designer one way or the other, and then they're going to get something that they're just going to have get redone in a month when their book is floundering, and they have to do the whole process all over again, and it costs them twice as much, when if they had just listened, or taken a step back. It's important, if you're a new author and you're working with a designer who has experience, okay, to remove your ego from the equation completely. Like, you have to kind of be able to step back and objectively say, like, I'm going to put my work in your hands. But I mean, that's what you're paying them for. Like, that's the reason that you hire a professional, is that you give them, you put your trust in them. I mean, because otherwise you can learn to do it yourself. I mean, cover design is complicated, but I mean, you can learn to do it. There are a mountain of classes online and tutorials for things like Photoshop or GIMP or Affinity or a million other software options. Like, you absolutely can learn to do it yourself. And I frankly think you should, because it gives you like a more complete respect for not only the genre that you're writing, but also just like book publishing in general, because you get to see under the hood of not only the portion that you're used to, which is just writing, 100,000 words, but also like the packaging aspect and being able to manage it all. And it keeps you, very like centered, I think. But yeah, like if you hire a designer and you don't listen to your designer, you're absolutely doing yourself a disservice, and your book absolutely is going to like, I mean, I won't say tank, but I mean, it will definitely be a detriment, to your earnings for sure.
Yeah. I think it's true that, I mean, anybody could learn these skills, but I think there's the designer, a good designer has an eye for what works and what doesn't. Like, I know that when I started, and it was a different landscape, right? This was pre-KU. This was like back in, I don't know what it was, 2013, where, self-publishing was fairly new at that point. There wasn't as much competition. And so I used to do my own covers. Cover designers were around, but like, it wasn't as big of a thing. So, I picked up the rudimentary skills. I did covers that, they were passable for the time. They were certainly fine. But as time went on, I needed to hire somebody to get better covers. But my point is, like, I could figure out the skills. I could watch, the tutorials, and I understand how to do this and to do that, but I don't have that visual eye. I can see a good cover and know it's a good cover when it's done, but I don't have the vision. It's the same thing when I'm trying to get like new blinds in my house, right? And the people the person comes by and they're showing me all these different options, and sure, they have samples, but I need to see it on my window against
Right.
with the color that
Yeah.
I'm gonna pick in my I need it already done, and
that.
then I can say whether that is right or not. I can't visualize whether it will be right or not. And so I know my own limitation. I'm not somebody who should be doing cover design, so I don't, right? So yeah, I agree that anybody can learn the skills, but I think that there are people that are gonna definitely be better at it. And if you understand I see the value in knowing how to do it. There's things that you can do. You don't necessarily need, like if you want to put out some ads or you want to do different like quick things for your web page or whatever, sure, it's good to know the skills to do that design. But to put together like a really good cover, I wouldn't. Just because I know how to technically do it, I would never like do it, because it wouldn't be as good as if I hired a designer who has that eye.
I taught myself cover design, but I made some stinkers before I ever like now I've got an eye for it because I've like broken down the genres and things. But I remember Craig and I first met in a subreddit, and I used to post the covers for my MMA romances, and he used to be like, no one wants to read MMA romances. I decided
that was a different issue though, right? That was like more you trying to write a genre, like a subgenre that just wasn't super popular, more than like a cover design issue necessarily.
Well, no, then I had the cover designs, and I had like really angular text, and I had like dodgy looking people on the covers and stuff, and it's like it just didn't look right. And then I changed the covers. And I think the thing that amazed me with my own books is when I changed the covers and when I updated the blurbs and things, the conversion rate for my advertising increased massively. I'd have 10 people going to my product page and one bought, and there before I'd be breaking even. And then if I change the cover, you'd have twice as many people going, and then you'd be making twice as much profit. And if you change the blurb, it doubles the set. So if you get the things right, it makes advertising such a viable prospect. And all you need is just that 1 cent difference between making a loss and making a profit when you're advertising to turn this into something you can do as a career.
Absolutely, because I mean, it's all exponential, right? Like, I mean, it's a very snowball effect, because I mean, the way Amazon's algorithm works is like you make a sale, and all of a sudden, like, you know, you are increased in the rankings because you've made a sale. And then you make 2 sales and you get another bump, and then you make 10 and you get another bump, and so on and so forth. And that all starts with your packaging. I mean, like, it doesn't matter what your book, like, the words in your book mean absolutely nothing at that point. Like, Amazon isn't changing its algorithm based on the length of your book or the book's genre or anything else. All Amazon cares about is how well you sell and how often you will convert to sales. So if someone lands on your page and buys your book, Amazon will put you higher, like in the rankings and in search results, than someone else who isn't selling. So it's hugely important to have your book cover. Like, that's like the name of the game, is like being able to have those sales, because it becomes exponential. The more people who ultimately see your book, especially if you've got a good cover and a good blurb, and then, I mean, ultimately a good book, is that, you know, you'll see like a huge like increase, like almost immediately. Like, it'll be like night and day different.
And I've noticed, I mean, I noticed when I had my first bestseller, it was just a case of, it was like that movie, The Producers, where it was like, where did I go right? And it's like and it started off with a cover. I happened to design a really good cover that had the shirtless guy and fit everything else for the expectations. And then it was just like, oh, that's what you need to do. And then you can make a career out of it.
I mean, when I first started doing covers, like, it was a mess. Like, I mean, you were saying, like, but it's like authoring. I mean, we've all written books. We all wrote that first book that was a complete piece of crap, you know, like, and probably like the 5th book that was like the same. So, I mean, like, those things that like embarrass you, like, down the road, like the awkward baby deer standing up for the first time. I mean, when you first started doing covers, like, yeah, like the covers that I made were, I'm going to be super clever and I'm going to, you know, like, break the mold, and like, you know, like, I know design, no problem. And those first covers were awful, just god awful. Like, I go back and look at them now and I'm just like, oh, like, so embarrassing. Like, and I mean, even like the stuff that like you make like down the road a little bit is just like, is so much better. And like, you know, it's just,
and
it's
that,
painful.
I mean, that's the thing, that people should not be afraid to change a cover of an older book, because it can breathe new life into that old product, especially if it's something where you look back, like you're saying, and you say, okay, this was a book I put out a long time ago. I didn't understand a lot of things and I've improved. And, you know, whether or not that means making other changes, you know, maybe you're rewriting the book, or maybe you're not. Maybe you're rewriting the blurb. Maybe you're just doing the cover or the title, you know, but it's not, you're allowed to do that, especially in self-publishing, right? You can go and you can change the cover, you can change the title, although if you change the title, you have to, you know, create a new book, and you know, you lose your reviews, you lose your all that stuff. But sometimes that's the right decision. It was for the author we spoke to last week. You know, it doubled her sales, even though it meant that she had to start over again. But there's advantages to starting over again too, right? Like the Amazon algorithms, it's a new book, they're starting to push you again, right? So if you have learned a whole bunch of things to improve your product, and you want to get more sales, that doesn't mean you have to write a new book, right? I mean, you're probably writing one anyways, but in the meantime, you can look at your old stuff and put out new covers and refresh them and maybe breathe new life into your catalog and everything that you're making before that. So it's not always about having to come up with another book in order to improve your sales. Sometimes you just have to improve what you did before and learn from the mistakes you made earlier.
And it pays dividends down the line. When we interviewed Jen Milliken, who had a 4-year-old book on TikTok, and she did a TikTok that went viral. And the reason her book then went to #1 in the ranks is because all of those people went there. Their cover was strong, their blurb was strong, their concept was strong, so they clicked buy. And it's like, it's down the line, you will have the opportunity for one of your older books to get new pairs of eyes on it. And if it's got a cover that's compelling, people are going to buy it. And if it doesn't have a cover that's compelling, people aren't.
Yeah, and that's a good point.
For sure.
Because if you if you let your books languish with covers that are subpar, and then something like that happens where all of a sudden maybe you put out a new book and everybody buys it and it becomes super popular, and then they go and they look at your other stuff, your back catalog, because they want to buy more stuff, and then they see something that doesn't look so great and they're like, well, I won't buy that one. So it's always good to make sure that your catalog and your older books look as good as they can, because you never know when lightning in a bottle will strike, like it did for Jen. Anything can happen, and you're always trying new things. And I remember when, back when I was writing, my first breakout book was like an MC romance that didn't even start, and it wasn't even it wasn't a romance so much as an erotica. It was a short erotic piece. It was
Let's be
really,
real.
really poorly written. And in my first iteration of it, it was not an MC book at all. But at that time, motorcycle club books, romances were just becoming popular. I think it was when Sons of Anarchy was popular, and that was like the new thing. And so I think I pulled that book and I just rewrote it as an MC. I didn't make a lot of changes, but I changed enough that it became an MC book, and I put it out, and it became my biggest. And it was such a bad book, but it had a really good cover for the time. And it's embarrassing now, but like at the time I was like, wow. And, from there, I eventually switched over to romance, and that one sort of like moved off, but that, you never know when that's going to happen. And, so it's best to always make sure that you're positioned to capitalize on that success if all of a sudden the spotlight turns your way.
And it's like one of those things that, like, as indie publishers, like we kind of have like that advantage over like our traditionally published contemporaries, where we don't have to wait for the committee to tell us that we can change our marketing, that we can update our covers, that we can update our blurbs. We can do it whenever, like whenever the mood strikes. Like literally you could change your cover 800 times in 1 year if that's what you want to do. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it because that's a really huge waste of time, but like if you want to, you could, like, and no one can tell you you can't. No one is going to tell you, I'm the boss, like you can't update your cover, like we are going to go with the, and a lot of times, like most of the time, authors who are traditionally published don't have any input on their covers one way or the other. Their publishing house decides based on whatever their designer is going to do, this is going to be your book cover, and that's it, period, end of story. And if it sells, then great, and if not, then well, oh well. So like that's a huge advantage we have, is that we can really kind of pivot on a dime, so we can change things based on not just like learning new things, but also market trends. I mean, there's always going to be like kind of trendy, simple things you might be able to change in your covers that would make them a little bit fresher, a little more contemporary. And it's easier for us to make those kind of changes and see, increased interest in books that, like you guys were saying, are older, that might just need a little spruce up, to make them viable again. So yeah, it's fun stuff.
I've noticed when I publish a new book, often I will have just as many sales as the first book in the series as I will the new book, because people, like, they see the new book, it interests them, but they want to start at the beginning of the series. And that only works because I've got a really good cover. If I didn't, people go back to that first book and they'd be like, oh, screw this.
Yeah. That's the way it works. I mean, yeah, people don't have attention spans. I mean, especially now. Like, I mean, there's so much content. Like, just a glut. There's a huge pile of content. People don't have time to sit and scroll through 300 pages of you know stuff that doesn't interest them anymore. They're gonna scroll through, like, the first few pages, see something that like catches their eye, like immediately pop that open. And if it's even like remotely something that sounds good to them, they're going to get it, because they want convenience, and they don't have the attention to like do a ton of shopping. They just want to, like, they're probably tired at the end of the day, or they're on vacation or whatever. They want to just grab something and have like a fun read. It's something they might like, and they're not going to do tons of shopping. So like, if you have something that like looks like it might appeal to them, 9 times out of 10, it's like somebody is going to click on that book and read it. And that's like, the cover is all, like, what makes that happen. Like like that really is like the name of the game always.
I would say it's funny. You said something about designing your cover before you write the book, and I say the best advice is to write the blurb before you write the book. It's advice I never take, obviously. I don't think any writer does, but I think if you were serious about self-publishing and you did your research and you saw the covers that was successful, you read the blurbs that was successful, and then you design the cover and come up with a blurb, it almost distills what is appealing about the book, and then you can focus on that when you write it. And it's so counterintuitive, but so many people just write the book they want to write. Whereas if you do that, you can see the story you want to tell, but you can highlight the elements of it that will appeal to readers.
I'd be worried about putting myself in a box where, I've done, especially if I'm paying somebody to do a cover, and I spend all this money on a cover, and then I'm writing the book, and something changes, and I change the direction of the book, and then all of a sudden the cover makes no sense anymore. I feel like that's a big waste. But yeah, in general, it can help you focus. At the very least, if there's images that you think, especially when you're writing romance, a lot of people, I don't think it matters that much, but a lot of people will say, I want a cover that has a person on it that matches what my main character looks like. And sometimes when you're using stock art, it's not that easy to find that. And maybe there's some things you can change, but there's only so much you can really change on a photo of a person before it's going to start looking fake. So when they're super specific, and then to find that picture, you might find that picture but the pose is wrong, or it's just, or there's something else. So maybe the one thing I would think is, if you found a stock image piece that you really liked, you can make the character in your book match that, so that you can then use it as opposed to the other way around. But that would be sort of what I would do, the most I would do in terms of picking my cover first.
It's funny, I'll often have with my covers, you won't see the character's face, because the body people readers like, but the face they want to be able to imagine themselves. But that's another convention. There are plenty. Romance kind of gets broken down into, there's the bare-chested, raw, sexy man thing, and then there are the couples, which are slightly sweeter romance, and then there are the illustrated ones like Tessa Bailey, and it's like the cover tells you what kind of book you can expect to read.
Right. And so then quickly, before we wrap this up, if somebody was looking for a cover designer, what are, I guess, some of the most important things that they should look at? Because there's lots of cover designers out there. Obviously, like Nate, you do cover designs for us, but that's not people's only options. There's tons of great cover designers out there. So when they're looking to pick one, sort of what should they be looking at?
Portfolio. It would be probably like the biggest. Like, when you're shopping for a designer, the first thing you want to look at is the body of their work. And any designer who is even semi-professional is going to have some sort of portfolio that you'll be able to check out, that you'll be able to see like work that they've done in the past. It won't be like you're going into a completely dark, like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to hire this designer, but I don't know what they can do. I guess I'll have to have them do this mock-up for me to make sure that like I meet, or that they meet my specifications. Most designers aren't going to do that. They're going to direct you to their portfolio, and that's where you're going to make your decision based on like their previous work. Like, does it meet, does it look like the kind of work, does it look like they can meet the genre expectations that the book that you're writing, or does it look like they'll be able to learn them? The other thing, a really good designer will have probably some kind of questionnaire for you. That's something that you want to look for, because they want to make sure that they are designing something that fits your book, that fits like you as an author, that they're not just going to, I'm doing a romance book, or I'm doing like a romance suspense, or I'm doing like a romance fantasy or whatever, and they just do some whatever they want to. I mean, you can actually have them do whatever they want to, and if you're happy with that, then great. But most designers are more interested in making something that is like, uniquely yours, like that you can be proud of, that you can be proud to cover your book with, that, you can say like, like if you have your book on your shelf or whatever, then, you can look at it every day and be like, yeah, I totally like wrote that book, and like the cover like makes me happy. So most designers, like if you're looking for a good one, good designer will always have a portfolio you can take a look at, and communication is probably like the biggest thing. So if you have a designer who falls off the face of the earth for like 3 weeks and you have no idea what's going on, you absolutely need to like find another designer, because especially like in this business, communication is absolutely key. And having someone who may be absolutely brilliant in their, they have a great eye, or like, they've got like tons and tons of thrilled customers or whatever. But like if somebody is ignoring you for 3 weeks, or, just is if you get like a feel that like maybe this isn't the best relationship for you, you should probably move on. Not every designer is going to be the best fit for every author, and you shouldn't be afraid to say, you know what, like I think that like this isn't going to be a good fit, because there are tons of designers out there, just like there are tons of authors out there, and there are people who are going to mesh better than others, and you shouldn't be afraid to say, you know what, I'm okay with like the two of us just going our separate ways, because a good designer will probably tell you, I'm not the designer for you. Like, and that's okay. Like, you should just shop around again. Like, it's not that big of a deal, because the benefit of having someone who works well with you means that your books sell better. Like, that means that you have a relationship that will last you for your career, because most designers are interested in designing. Like, that's what they pay their bills with. So if you have a good relationship with a designer, it can last you for years, for decades, like for the length of your own career. I mean, you guys could win awards together, or, be friends. Like, I mean, it's something where you can build something, a relationship that will ultimately be hugely beneficial for both of you. So like, but it all starts with like looking at their work, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people, once they find a designer they like, they stick with them for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I think you've also got to have a designer who'll push back if you need it, or at least give justification of the choices they make, which I think that we can do. Now, unfortunately, it looks like we are running out of time. This has been a fascinating discussion, Nate. We need to have you back on this podcast
anytime.
Again, I think.
Anytime.
And hopefully,
God knows.
Well, Nate, you're a cover designer. You do other stuff. If people want to find out about your services and what you do, where do they go and find you?
Well, I only do cover design through Hidden Gems. Most of like the work that I do, I don't tend to do a lot of like freelancing these days. Just don't have time for it. So pretty much, if you want to find me, I'm at Hidden Gems. If you want to learn more about like cover design, if you want to learn more about self-publishing, I'm also on Reddit a lot of the times as Salacious Stories. I'm the moderator of our erotic authors and our romance authors. And both Roland and Craig both are frequent posters there too. So there's a great like self-publishing communities if you're interested in learning more about the subject. Lots of people there are thrilled to help you be successful. So Yeah, it was great, guys. Thanks for the chat.
You've
very
also written some great blog posts for Hidden Gems.
Yeah, well,
so
you
go
know,
check those out.
I don't as often as I would like to, but I do try to, if I'm going to put something out there, like I want it to be, like I do keywords, cover design, stuff that like people struggle with, especially when they're starting out with self-publishing. Because I mean, it's the stuff that I struggled with when I started self-publishing. I mean, I started in 2014, not knowing anything, so I mean, if I write something or I put something out there, it's usually because it's something that I personally struggled with that I think that would, help people out. So yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I'll take an article anytime I can twist his arm into
Yeah.
getting him to write one for sure.
Yeah.
So thanks again for coming on, Nate. I think this is really something. It's such an important topic, and it's definitely something that authors, have struggle with. Some, especially starting out authors, understanding the importance of the cover, and so this is a great explanation of why it's important and what a good cover can do for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Nate. If you've enjoyed this conversation, make sure to leave a comment down below. Give us a like. If you haven't done already, whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening as a podcast, make sure you subscribe. And we will be back next week with another episode of Fully Booked. Thank you so much.